Yeah.
Good morning. And that's it. That's the end of my Norwegian. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for asking me to come here to talk to you about some of the projects that my company Wood is involved with, which are participating to the overall evaluation of the Water Directive process. So, my name is Victoria Cherrier, and I work for Wood, and I am based in the UK, in London, but we've got offices a bit everywhere. The two projects I'm going to talk to you about today are the fitness check for the Water Framework Directive. It also includes the Floods Directive, but this is not a directive which is really of interest for you, so I'll leave it out, but just for completeness, you know that it's in there. This includes a team with a lot of pan-European organizations. And then there is another project, which is the integrated assessment of the second River Basin Management Plan. So that's second for EU member states, which is led by another consultancy, but which includes also a wide team and Wood. So as I overlap, and I'm in both teams, we thought it would be a good idea for me to present a little bit this project, and in particular to show opportunities for you to get involved and provide feedback. And this is what I'll go through in my presentation. So the project. Usually a chart explains more than a long speech, so I'll try to do that. But in the grey box, there is the evidence base on water policy, which is continuously built, where all the EU-wide studies which are done, or the academic publication, or national initiative and national project feed into. And then there's EU-wide project. The three big, which are ongoing at the moment, are the compliance assessment of the River Basin Management Plan, and the RBMPs is for the floods. This integrated assessment of the River Basin Management Plan, and a project which is called Blue 2, which is looking at economic valuation of water policy and economic measures. And so these three big projects are feeding into this evidence base, which we use for the support project for the fitness check, and which DG Environment also use when they will do the actual fitness check. So the fitness check is a staff working document, which will be written by DG Environment. What we are doing as part of Wood is a study to help that. We are not doing the fitness check. That is a responsibility of the European Commission. But sometimes there's shortcuts, so I prefer make this clear. And in order to provide a bit of an overview of all this legislation, we have the Water Framework Directive, which is assisted by the daughter directives, so the Environmental Quality Standards Directive and the Groundwater Directive. And then there's a flood. But all together, they're covered by the fitness check. At the moment, there is also an evaluation ongoing, which is for the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. So these two processes are in parallel and they are talking to each other. Going into the water legislation, there's three big directives which are also very important to keep in mind. The Drinking Water Directive, Basin Water Directive, and the Nitrates Directive. And they form some of the measure for Water Framework Directive, some of the basic measure. And then in the softer policy world, there's all the initiatives which are happening and which are linked to the water policy. So there's the strategy on plastics, the pharmaceutical in the environment, there's a new proposal for water reuse, there's also wider policy, like the circular economy policy and all of these things. And so a very important part of the fitness check is to check that all of these initiatives, legislation, work together and are coherent together. So I'll just, oh, that may be long if I go back. But I'll start talking to you about the integrated assessment project because it is an input into the support for the fitness check project. And it will be a bit more logical that way. So I need to go back. Here we go. Integrated assessment project. So started in autumn 2017, hoping to finish in spring this year. Very big project involving, as you've seen, a lot of partners and a lot of in-country experts doing assessment at the national level. So this is not the compliance project. There is, in the parallel, a compliance assessment which is being done, and Anders was mentioning a report will be published in the coming months by European Commission. So this integrated assessment is not that. It's trying to understand whether the key management principles, which are part of the Water Framework Directive, have been taken into the decision-making in the member state. And have they been operationalized? Have they gone into the steps to make them work? And so this relies on the DPSIR framework, which is D is for driver, P is for pressure, S is for state, I is for impact, and R is for responses. And all of these elements play onto the environment and are meant to be taken into account all together to find a coherent and effective approach at river basin level. And so as part of this project, we are looking at the application of this DPSIR framework at member state and at EU level through 4 key pressures: nutrients, hydromorphology, abstraction, and chemical pollution. And we are also identifying good practices. Where can we learn from? What have a country done which seems like a good idea, which has delivered good results? A big part of the project is to look at synergies and trade-off with policies. So as I was showing before, there's a lot of legislation only for the water, but then there's a lot more legislation. So as you mentioned with industrial emission, there is industrial emission directives, there is chemical legislation, there is land use planning legislation with strategic environmental assessment. And so how are these legislation taking into account the requirement of the Water Framework Directive? Are they? Or is it more of a partition, segregated approach? And so the assessment that we are doing is asymmetric in the sense that not all pressure are equally important in all countries. Abstraction might be more relevant in some countries than in other. So we make this relative. And so as part of the project, there has been a stakeholder workshop in November where we had great presentations and some of you attended, I think. And we are now looking into, so that's a bit of an illustration of how this DPSIR framework is framed and how we are trying to look, so the other way, you know, is it feeding into the right response or is it just a top-down way of thinking about pressures? And so this project is now entering a drafting stage, really, where we've gathered a lot of evidence and we are trying to prepare reports and things like that, which will come out in a few more months, but hopefully will be a very useful input for the fitness check. The fitness check, which we've covered on a little bit already, it's part of this Commission Better Regulation for Better Results agenda, trying to verify that all the legislation which is in place is meeting the objective that it was meant to meet. It's also checking that it is implemented and that it is implemented in the most efficient way so that the costs and the benefits are proportionate and that the needs are met. A fitness check is an evaluation, but it is called fitness check because there are several legislation. But methodologically, it's exactly the same than an evaluation, and the methodology is very clear and detailed into the Better Regulation guidelines. Don't know if you ever looked at them, but it's saying very clearly what you need to check and who you need to involve. And the key point of fitness check is to understand that it is backward looking. So it's all what happened in the past. Has it worked? What has not worked and why? This is not about change and this is not about review. It's only about what happened in the past and how it has been done. And it is all about evidence. So we know lots of people have got opinions, and that's great, but there's need to be evidence or data to support this so that they can be actual facts, not just feelings. The water legislation already had a fitness check in 2012, and it was a different methodology back then, very similar, but some differences. And it was a wider scope. So as part of the first fitness check, it was also looking at the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, for example, in it. And it concluded that it was, there was a lot of good findings, but needed some more time of implementation to understand what had worked and what had not worked. And so the legislation, Article 19 of the Water Framework Directive, requires that there is an evaluation of the legislation. This is why it has come time to do this. And because the Water Framework Directive is operationalized by the Groundwater Directive and the Environmental Quality Standards Directive, it was decided to mix all together. So this fitness check is guided by the roadmap, as Anders indicated, which provides all of the objectives. It started in spring, so the roadmap was before, in autumn 2017, following which DG Environment let a support contract, which started in spring, and which will finish again in spring this year. The aim is to gather evidence and to provide them to DG Environment so that they can use them as part of their own assessment. We are conducting the assessment against 5 criteria, which are effectiveness, efficiency, coherence, relevance, and EU added value. So for these criteria, effectiveness, check that the legislation does what it was meant to do. So it's meeting the objective. Objective are good ecological status, good quantitative status, non-deterioration, this kind of thing. Efficiency is checking that the legislation does what it was meant to do in the most cost-efficient way, so that the benefits and the costs of implementing the legislation are balanced. Coherence is looking at the legislation and how it fits into the wider perspective and to the wider policy context. So making sure that what the Water Framework Directive requires is not in contradiction with other legislation or does it preempt the application of other legislation and vice versa. Relevance is to verify that there are not new needs, that what the directive says is still up to the needs of the legislation. And EU added value for water is usually quite easy because that is to verify that the action is best placed at EU level. And as Anders has shown, there is a very high number of international transboundary river basin, which is always easier to manage at an international level with collaboration of the parties involved. So this is the 5 criteria that we are analyzing. And to do this, we gather a lot of evidence and information. So we are undertaking these different actions, which I've provided here with a bit of an indicative timing, which I think can be useful to know where the inputs can be coming on your side. The first one that we've mostly done is looking at literature. So a lot is already published, a lot of work is already done in terms of water policy. So we've been looking through that and understand what kind of evidence is already there. Then there is the public consultation, which is online, which I've provided a link to, which I've also provided a link to. It is for the general public, but also for expert people. There's two parts to the consultation. So if you want to respond, you can go directly to the expert part if you want, or you can respond to both. But yeah, the first part is for general public. Don't get stuck there. If you think it's too simple and you want to say things a bit more complicated, you can go to the next part for experts. And it will be open until beginning of March. So there's still a bit of time to respond to that. Then we are drafting questions for something that we called targeted survey. So the idea is then to just approach experts directly with specific question on narrow topics. So for example, we have question on the coherence of the legislation, or we have question on the one out, all out principle. So how good ecological status gets defined. So very specific question, and trying to understand the views from the experts on this. This gets followed by targeted interviews. So again, by interviews with some experts. The targeted here is to say we will talk to experts in each country to have some representativeness. We have some focus group, which will come later in the year. And so the focus group will look at 3 topics in detail. So we have one looking at cost and benefits, because it's always a challenging aspect to tackle. We'll have another one looking at floods in particular, for example. And there will be very small group with discussions, and we'll come with our question as consultant of things we haven't been able to respond to, and we'll ask the expert their views on it. And finally, we have some more public-faced events, which are the workshops. So there was one which was held already in October, where some of you attended as well. There'll be another one in probably late March, and another one in later spring to present the results of our study. So quite a lot of opportunities for people to feed into. As part of the work we've been doing, I've tried to identify some of the first issues that have been raised often by stakeholders who've talked to us so far. The fact that non-deterioration principle is also an objective of the directive. There's often focus on good ecological status, which is great, but there's also non-deterioration principle on the same level. The application of the one out, all out principle. Progress on achieving the objectives and how this has gone, which, we had a very good presentation on that. How we define chemical and ecological status and how these interact together. The reporting and the monitoring comes up quite often. So the effort needed for the monitoring network, the reporting tool itself, the effort needed to report into the electronic tool. The overall governance system, so as you've presented, trying to involve different layers of the public, top-down, but also bottom-up, top-down, bottom-up. Cost and benefit of the legislation, which, as soon as the legislation includes environmental benefit, there's challenge to value these and then to compare these to actual costs. The coherence, and the application of exemption, so how these are understood in different countries and how they are applied throughout the reporting period. So again, I've put the link of the public consultation, which is, for now, I guess your best bet to get involved into the debate. But then the questionnaire, which I'll be circulating through to the Norwegian Environment Agency, so will probably be circulated if you are interested, and then further event, which will also be well publicized. So that is the project email address if you want to get in touch with anything. And there is also a web page, I should have added the link actually, on the Digi Environment website, which is kept up to date with what is happening. So that's also a good place to check, because all the materials from workshops and things like that is also made available. So that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Tack.